Dear listeners, we have good news. In the description under this video, you can find our new channel. Please support our channel with your subscription so you won't miss new fascinating stories. Enjoy listening to it. As the sun set over the horizon and the last rays streamed in through the window of my studio, I felt a genuine pleasure. It was my refuge, a place where I could fully immerse myself in my thoughts and creativity. Working at the sawmill was not my true passion, of course, but I accepted it as a temporary measure, a necessity to ensure my life with Tiffany in this cozy little town by the woods. The workshop was my holy place, where I could showcase my talent as a radio technician. There were tables full of tools, shelves full of boxes of parts, and drawings and diagrams hanging on the walls. Idea after idea was always raging in my head, and the workshop allowed me to bring them to life. After a hard day's work at the sawmill, when I returned home, I felt tired, but it disappeared as soon as I crossed the threshold of my workshop. Here I found a second wind, forgetting my everyday worries and problems. My passion for radio engineering began when I was a child. My father was an amateur radio operator, and I spent a lot of time with him, watching him take things apart and put them together. He taught me the basics, and I soon realized that I had a special gift in this area. Tiffany wasn't always pleased that I didn't always arrive on time for dinner. Sometimes she would bring me sandwiches and tea, and sometimes she would just leave a plate with a portion on the table in the kitchen. One day, she came into the studio with a plate in her hands, her eyes expressing resentment and a certain sadness. I mechanically continued my work without paying any attention to her. Ethan, I don't understand how you can spend all your time here. You don't even notice me anymore. I took my eyes off my work and looked at her, a little annoyed. Tiffany, I'm just minding my own business. A friend asked me to fix a toy for his son. You know how much I love doing that. I don't tell you how to spend your personal time, do I? You should at least take money for that. It's no use. She threw a plate on the table. I felt my calm state turning into irritability. I can't take money from my friends. Are you bored? Yeah, man, bored. When was the last time we went out? When did you give me flowers? You're not married to me. You're married to your goddamn job. Tiffany freaked out and left, slamming the door. I can't say I didn't feel guilty at all, but I wanted her to understand me. She herself worked at the local cafe as a manager, and outside of work, she liked to take care of the pigeons she raised in our backyard. Sometimes she was too demanding, but even though I was busy with my own work, I still made time for her. But even though I was very patient, she sometimes managed to get me into a surge of negative emotions. I waited for her to leave, her sermons making me lose my mind about how to remake a radio-controlled car for a friend's son. And I promised him I'd have it finished by tomorrow. An inward surge jerked my hand, and I dropped the plate off the table in one fell swoop. The sandwich shattered into several pieces on the floor. After a second, I came to my senses, looked regretfully at my failed dinner, and sighed heavily. I realized that I would not be able to finish what I had planned today. And leaving the toy in a disassembled form on the table, I went into the house. But as I crossed the threshold, I noticed something unusual. A pair of strange men's shoes were standing at the front door. We used to take our shoes off outside and change into slippers so as not to bring mud inside. The boots told me something was different. Quickly changing shoes, I headed into the kitchen, where Tiffany usually was. She was sitting at the table, holding a cup of coffee. Whose shoes are in the hallway? Did you invite someone over? Tiffany looked at me with disbelief. I told you about it 2 weeks ago, Ethan. I put up an ad for a room. We have a couple extra, and we need the money. I think I was beginning to recall her telling me something like that, but apparently it slipped my mind. And? I asked. And then today a man came who's here on business for a couple of months and was specifically looking for a home setting. His name is Benjamin Walken. He's a very nice man, you can tell he's well-mannered. And you couldn't have consulted me before letting anyone in the house. I felt my hands clench into fists. Tiffany sighed and take a sip of coffee. Do you care about anything other than your trinkets? I didn't know how to answer her better. In a way, she was right. But letting a stranger into the house without knowing anything about him, I thought, was stupid of her. Stupid woman, I muttered, and all I could say was, that's when the tenant himself came downstairs. Oh, I beg your pardon? I didn't mean to inconvenience you. I just need a room and a couple of meals. I won't bother you with anything else. I swear you won't even think about me. I'm Benjamin Walken. He held out his hand to me. I believe you're Ethan, the landlord. I was slightly embarrassed by his politeness, but I extended my hand in return. During the handshake, I sensed that this man was not as simple as he seemed at first sight. Oh, come now, Mr. Walken. You're not embarrassing us at all. Please make yourself at home, Tiffany interjected. Call me Benjamin, just Ben. I turned to him and asked, and what is the purpose of your visit to our remote town? I can tell you, I am a writer, and I have become fascinated with the subject of urban legends. From some sources, I have learned that there are some fascinating legends about your town. So I came to talk to the residents and visit the library to learn more information so I could write a great book. Of course, mister. Tiffany encouraged the conversation. You can also come to our cafe. There's an old man who is a frequent guest there, and everyone thinks he's crazy. But I think you can learn a lot of useful information for the book from him. Tiffany, do we have anything left for dinner? I asked, looking in the fridge. Aren't you full? There was an accident with my dinner. So, is there anything? I'll fix it. Ben, will you join us for dinner? I'd be delighted to join you. Ben smiled and sat down at the table. Several days passed. Our lodger gave no reason to doubt him. He behaved quite decently and tried to stay out of our lives. Although I was away at work all day, I now spent less time in the workshop in the evenings and more time in the house. I didn't want to leave things unsupervised. He paid well for the room and even gave over and above the amount as a reward for sustenance. Tiffany started cooking more often, and I noticed that the food tasted better than before. Apparently she was trying to please her tenant. He was free to leave the house. His wife gave him a spare key, and he wandered around town looking for information for his book. In the evenings, over dinner, he would share what he had learned. But sometimes he would just take his portion to his room. On such days, he looked sad and tired. One day I invited him to sit with me on the terrace and just have a beer, to relieve my brain and chat not about books and legends, but just talk about the little things in life. I told him what I was into. He even asked to see my workshop. So I asked him about where he's from and what he's into besides writing. I asked about his family and friends. All these questions he answered briefly, discreetly, and reluctantly, as if he did not want to share information about himself. It seemed strange to me because a person does not withhold information about himself without reason. I didn't say anything to Tiffany about it, and I noticed that she got very attached to him, always smiling sweetly and trying to please. At the time, I thought she was just trying to keep a generous tenant. She even stopped nagging me for my fanatical fascination with radio components. A month later, Ben approached me with an unexpected offer. I was sitting outside the workshop at the time, fixing Tiffany's pigeon cage. Deaton, I have a proposal for you that might interest you. It concerns your specialty. Did someone really need a tree? I thought at first he meant my job at the sawmill. No. I'm talking about your work with the various appliances you're so adept at handling. He took out his trademark pipe, filled it with tobacco, and lit it with a few puffs. I have an acquaintance who assembles cars, and he needs a skilled technician. He needs one part done, and I know you can handle it easily. I assure you, he'll pay you well. I can't deny I'm interested in the offer. What do I have to do? Are you in? First, I need to know what I have to deal with. Don't worry. It's nothing that will get you into trouble. It's just that his engineers aren't up to the task, and after watching you, I am confident that you can handle it easily. Balay, tell me what you need. He told me that he needed to make a circuit board and some parts for it. He briefly described what it would look like, then invited me into his room and took the drawings out of his satchel, neatly rolled up. While he pulled out the blueprints, I had a chance to take a look at his living quarters. I realized that I hadn't visited him since his arrival. The room had changed a lot since then. He had rearranged the furniture to his liking and hung dark curtains, giving the room a semi-dark atmosphere with only a desk lamp providing light. "Here, please see," he said as he laid out the drawings on the table. As I studied the drawing, I realized that this was no ordinary piece. I couldn't even imagine what it could be used for. In the end, it was supposed to be a cylinder with a rod and a box at the top. What was it for? All I can say is that it would pay well. I don't know exactly what it was for, and the customer asked me not to ask unnecessary questions. I looked again and understood that I could make this strange construction, but I said that I needed some time to think. After all, it was a sudden offer, and considering how much they were willing to pay, I realized that it may not be entirely legal, or it could be for some underground laboratory. Ben agreed with my decision, but asked me not to delay my answer. I went to my workshop and started working on the old receiver. This kind of work always gave me a good idea. In the end, I decided to agree. He promised that my name would not be mentioned anywhere, and I could use the proceeds to repair my house, which I had been meaning to do for a long time. I went into the house and headed to his room to announce my decision. But as I approached, I heard that he was not alone. I could hear a woman's whispering coming from the room. I quietly approached and opened the door. Through the crack, I could see his broad back and a woman's arms around him in the dimly lit room. They were whispering affectionate words, and the woman was softly moaning. I thought our lodger had snuck in his mistress, even though we had not forbidden it. But a few seconds later, I noticed the familiar blonde curls, and when I looked closely, I saw a bracelet on her arm that was identical to my wife's. There was no doubt in my mind that Tiffany was hugging Ben. After all, that bracelet was one of a kind. It was custom made, and I had given it to her for our wedding anniversary, and she had hardly taken it off since. When I saw this scene, I was furious. The man who seemed so polite and respectable was now cheating on his wife. Well-meaning Ben, who seemed so polite, was now having an affair with my wife. I felt hatred for both of them, and was about to burst into the room with the intention of shouting at him, but then an idea occurred to me on how I could expose them and still benefit myself. I quietly turned around and went downstairs to the living room, turning on the TV and waiting for my wife to show up. She arrived in a hurry and, as usual, offered me dinner before going into the kitchen. Meanwhile, I went out into the yard and opened several cages of pigeons. Tiffany didn't even notice my absence. I went back into the kitchen and sat down at the table, waiting for her to serve the food. Outside the window, I heard the flutter of wings and the cooing of pigeons. Tiffany immediately looked out the window and exclaimed, "Oh no, those are my pigeons." I replied, "Oh yeah? They're probably just flocking to your bait." Tiffany ran outside in anticipation, calling out for her birds. Meanwhile, I went to the pot and added a fair amount of salt and pepper, stirring everything thoroughly. I sat back down as if nothing had happened, knowing that the cages had somehow opened and the birds had scattered. Tiffany was worried, but I reassured her, "What are you worried about? You've domesticated them by now. Just put some food in their cages and they'll fly back on their own." At that moment, Ben came downstairs. I greeted him, mentally hating him. "Ben, what a grease. My birds, they all flew away," Tiffany wailed. I comforted her, "Don't worry, Tiffany. I promise, after dinner, I'll help you and we'll all help them back to their abode together." A little reassured by Ben's promise, Tiffany began serving food onto the plates. I took out my phone and pretended to look for something I needed at the time. Out of the corner of my eye, I watched Ben shovel the first spoonful of soup into his mouth, but after a second, he blushed and coughed heavily. Tiffany was really freaked out and immediately rushed to his aid, calling out to me for help. Ben's seizure began to pass and he grabbed a glass of water from the table, gulping it down greedily. His eyes widened and he pointed to the plate, asking, "Tiffany, what is it?" She didn't immediately understand, but I explained that it was the usual soup she often made. Ben suggested that she try it herself, saying that it was impossible to eat. When she tasted the food, she realized what was wrong. I wanted to laugh so badly that I could barely contain myself. Tiffany started apologizing to our tenant, swearing it was just a misunderstanding, and started serving salad and meat. But Ben apparently took offense and went to his room spitting and coughing as he went. "Did you do this?" She came at me with an angry look. I got up from the table and grabbed her by the shoulder and pulled her into a chair. "Do you want to make a fool out of me? I saw you today, bitch. Do you want a man?" I saw the guilt and fear in her eyes. "I'll tell you this. If I ever find out you're doing anything like that again, I'll tie you up at the sawmill and saw you in half. Do you understand?" She just nodded silently. I let go of her shoulder and don't you dare say anything to Ben. Just stop talking to him like a good landlord. I went to check on our tenant and see how he was doing. He was already feeling much better. I apologized for the failed soup and said that I agreed to his offer to make a detail. For several days I worked on a fancy appliance, but my talent never failed me and the blueprints helped a lot. Soon I was finished and invited Ben into the workshop to pick up the order. "Oh, you truly are a genius. What a masterpiece," he exclaimed. "When do I get the money?" I asked. "Right away," Ben replied. "I want to start the repairs soon," I added when Ben looked at me questioningly. "Of course," he said. "Half of the money I'm willing to give you now, and you'll get the other half when they test the device." I agreed, knowing that was enough for me in case he decided not to pay extra. Ben went to his room and soon returned with a paper bag, handing it to me. I opened it and realized that this was exactly what the customer needed. There was at least 200,000. I knew that was a lot, but I didn't expect that much. "You can have it," Ben said, already dressed for the trip. He wrapped the device in plastic wrap and took it to the car. After saying goodbye and wishing him a safe journey, I stayed in the workshop for a few minutes, admiring the bills I had received. Then I locked them in the safe, which even Tiffany didn't know about. I decided to celebrate my success with a bottle of beer that I had on my desk. After taking a few sips, I pulled out a small remote from my desk drawer with a red light flashing on it and pressed the button. It was my personal gift to Ben, for he didn't know I had stuffed the device with explosives. Dear listeners, your support is very important to us. If you enjoyed our story, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your feedback is crucial in helping us improve our content.